Hello everybody and welcome to our virtual 67 Pall Mall. Later today we'll be joined by Tal Sutherland-Cohen for a tasting of wines coming from the Judean Hills. But for now we're very happy to welcome the MD of AXA Millésimes, Mr. Christian Seeley, for a tasting of Chateau Pichon Baron Longueville. Please do chat away on the side and share with us what you're drinking and where you're drinking it from. We hope it's a bottle of Pichon. Please also share on social media with hashtag 67FromHome. As usual, we'll have 15 minutes at the end to ask questions. And a big hello to Christian. How are you?
And hello, everybody. Thank you for coming in for this tasting. Now I'm going to see if I've mastered this technology. I thought what I'd do is very quickly, before we get down to the important business, which is tasting the wines, which I hope you have, is to have a very speedy presentation just to give you a little bit of context to Pichon Baron before we go and taste the wine. So if this should work.
Yeah, perfect.
Am I on screen? Yes, that's good. So Pichon Baron is part of the AXA Millésimes winemaking group of companies, which I manage, but my head office is here at Pichon Baron. And so we have Chateau Pichon, which is in the north of Pauillac with 17 hectares. We have Pichon Baron, which is 72 hectares of Pauillac. We have Chateau Sudureau, where we have 94 hectares of Premier Cru vineyard in Sauternes, where we make Sauternes and dry white wines. We have Domaine Arlot down here, which is 14 hectares in Burgundy, most of it Premier Cru Nuit Saint-Georges, but a bit of Grand Cru in Romanée Saint-Vivant. Here we have Dijnocke in Tokai, 104 hectares of Premier Cru Tokai vineyards. Here, Quinta de Noval in the Douro Valley, we have actually 145 hectares there, making, of course, great vintage ports, the National, the vintage ports, but increasingly more and more very thrilling Douro red wines and white wines, unfortified. And finally, our newest acquisition is Outpost, which is we bought 2 years ago, which is still quite small, but it's a very great terroir, volcanic vineyard at the very top of Howell Mountain, making some of the most spectacular Cabernets in Napa. So now I need to move on to give you a little idea of where we are. This, of course, is a map showing where the vineyards are. So Arlot is here. We're here in Bordeaux. There's Quinta de Noval. There, of course, is Hungary. And then across the ocean over here, here is Outpost. To get a little closer to where we are, we're in Pauillac, of course, here. And this is Pichon Baron. It's important just to remind anybody who's a little hazy on the geography that the Medoc is a peninsula sticking out into the ocean. Here's the ocean, here's the Gironde. And when people talk about the left bank wines, that's because they're in this zone on the left bank of the Gironde. The right bank wines over here, where you have Pomerol and Saint-Emilion, are on the right bank. But we are in the left bank today, and that's what we're going to talk about. Pichon Baron. A couple of pictures to give you a little idea of the chateau. Of course, it's one of the emblematic images of Bordeaux, but the chateau, however beautiful it is not really what it's all about. What really matters is the vineyard that surrounds it, what's in the ground and what's planted there. That's what makes the wines great. Now, there's a little picture showing you, here's the chateau you see from the road. Here is the vineyard of Pichon Baron. These little stone things here. This is the boundary stone of Château Latour. This is the boundary stone of Lerville-Lascas, which for a very long time have looked at each other across this little frontier. And about 4 years ago, I thought that it was time to build a boundary stone for Pichon Baron. So that's the Pichon Baron stone now, which now looks across the road at them. And you can now see the three stones together, Latour, Pichon Baron, Lascas. And this is important because the three vineyards are quite neighboring, actually. So this little chart should give you an idea of where we are. Well, where I am, actually, I am right now just here at the point of that arrow. So I'm in the tasting room at the heart of Pichon. The chateau is just beside me. And everything you see in pink or orange, depending on your perception of the thing, is vineyard land that belongs to us. So here it is. all Pichon Baron. This line here is the frontier between Pauillac, sorry, I went ahead of myself, I will go back, is the frontier between Pauillac to the north and Saint-Julien to the south. And over here, you can hardly see it, but there is the Gironde. This area here, this is the Grand Clos of Château-Latour. This area here is the Grand Clos of Leuville-Lascasse. This area here is the central plateau at the heart of the historic Pichon Baron terroir. It's important to get an idea of what we've been doing perhaps over the last 20 years at Pichon Baron, because until 2001, which is actually when I took over here, we were making Pichon Baron from all this land. So this great plateau is the greatest land we have at Pichon Baron, and all the rest of it is extremely good Pauillac terroir. And, but we were using all of this land to make Pichon Baron Grand Vin in the 1990s. And we would often make 350, 360,000 bottles of Pichon Baron in the 1990s. From 2001 onwards, we decided to make a change, and it was a very important strategic change. And the logic was a simple one. This great plateau here and the lands that are in this sort of area, opposite Latour, opposite Lascasse, they are the very greatest terroirs of Pichon. And we decided that we would dramatically reduce the volume of Pichon that we would make and make a much stricter selection. In other words, the Grand Vin of Pichon would essentially be coming from here, and everything else around here would be used for the second wines. So since 2001, we've been making basically a lot of second wine and much less Grand Vin. The average volume of Grand Vin Pichon we've been making since 2001 has averaged 160,000 bottles. That's against an average of about 350,000 in the 90s. That's a big change. And the only reason for making such a change is an ambition to make Pichon as great as it possibly can be. And our logic from the very beginning was that if you want to make Pichon as great as it can be, you've got to concentrate on the very greatest terroirs, which doesn't mean that all the rest of this isn't very good. It is. And so we make two second wines, actually. There's, so from the vines that are in this sort of area, which is further away from the river, less gravelly, more suitable for Merlot, we make the Tourelle, which is one of our two second wines, which is very Merlot based. And then from vineyards in this sort of area, we make the Griffon, which is our other second wine, which is slightly more Cabernet based. And then, of course, from the Grand Terroir at the heart of it all, that's where we make the Pichon Baron, Grand Vin. This is a little shot that actually shows you a view across the Great Plateau, which is, I hope this photograph shows that actually the Medoc is not flat. And where we are, we're in the middle of a little patch of undulating ground. As you come out of the village of Saint-Julien, you actually go down a hill towards the border between Saint-Julien and Pauillac, and then you come up the hill and you see this undulating ground around you. On your left, you have the vineyard of Pichon Baron. On your right, as you leave Saint-Julien, it's Lascasse, and then as you come into Pauillac, it's Latour. And this little corner, southern Pauillac, northern Saint-Julien, is undulating ground with very deep beds of gravel in the soil. And this is the ideal terroir for the Cabernet Sauvignon grape. And I could even stick my neck out and say that it's, well, it's certainly among the very greatest terroirs in the world for the Cabernet Sauvignon. And if I really wanted to stick my neck out, I could say perhaps it's the greatest. But anyway, the personality of Pichon Baron, at least since 2001, has been very much determined by this piece of land that you see here, these deep beds of gravel where we have old vine Cabernet Sauvignon, and it's very grand, noble Cabernet Sauvignon that determines the personality, the grandeur, and the quality of Pichon Baron Grand Vin. And now we move on. That's another shot of the same area, just showing you that the estuary is there. There are the three bottles. So you have the Pichon Baron Grand Vin, Les Tourelles, the Merlot-based second wine, Les Griffons, the Cabernet-based second wine. By the way, the two second wines are absolutely great, and I would, you know, these wines are made with grapes from vineyards that used to be in the Grand Vin Pichon Baron, and they are humble enough to offer themselves at a price that is a fraction of the Grand Vin, but they're very serious Pauillac wines and thoroughly recommended. And here we have the labels, and I thought it would be interesting to see this because the Pichon Baron label has hardly changed for, well, since the middle of the 19th century, actually. But there have been a few little tiny modifications in the last few years. So I wanted to show you a label, how it used to be and how it is now. We made a few modifications, actually in 2012, 2013. And my idea was to make some modifications that I considered important, but I was hoping that nobody would notice. But fundamentally, we were making an important change, but that conservative Pichon lovers would just hardly notice the difference. So look at these griffons on the label of Pichon Baron in the old days. Look at this griffon's face. He's really not looking very well, and look at his thighs. They're just, you know, he needs to go to the gym, frankly. And so I wanted to use the griffons much more as an image of Pichon Baron. I thought, but these griffons, they just don't look very well. So we changed the griffons. So look at them now. This is a griffon with a positive attitude, and he's been working out a little bit, and that's the new image of Pichon Baron since 2012. Also, the name of the chateau, actually, and the label has changed, although most people haven't noticed. For years, actually, since the mid-19th century, the actual name of this property was Chateau Pichon Longueville, au Baron de Pichon Longueville. That's the whole name of the chateau. Well, it's not a very catchy name. It's a bit long. What it actually means, of course, is the Chateau Pichon Longueville that belongs to the Baron of Pichon Longueville. And it's a bit of a mouthful. And in fact, what everybody ended up calling this chateau was Pichon Baron. And so from about 2000, I think in 2012, we decided that it was better to be clear about who we are and rename the property after the name that everybody uses to talk about us, which is Chateau Pichon Baron. So there you have Chateau Pichon Baron, and that's what it looks like these days. It still says Au Baron de Pichon Longueville, which is not really true. It belongs to Axomillésime, but there you are, it's tradition. So that's that. Now, we're going to taste today a series of 6 wines that come from the recent years of Pichon Baron, and I wanted to show these particular wines for a reason. They're among the wines that I think are among the great wines that you can begin to taste and drink these days in the recent period. And I also think that they are wines that are very entertaining and instructive to compare, particularly comparing them in pairs. So the idea today is that we're going to taste 15, then 14, and compare the vintages for reasons that I hope will become obvious. Then the 10 and the 9, and then the 5 and the 4. And I hope you will enjoy that. Of course, the idea of any vertical tasting of this sort is, well, for me, the idea is twofold. One of them is that I hope that at the end of a tasting like this, you will gain an idea of the underlying personality of Pichon Baron, which should run through all the wines. There is something that is uniquely Pichon Baron in these wines, but then equally, whereas you of course have the imprint of the terroir, we are in the Medoc. This is an oceanic climate, and the weather is very different every year. And that's part of the fun of these Grand Cru wines. You have the character and personality of the terroir, but you also have the individual imprint of what nature gave us in that year. And as I hope you will see, each year has its own charms and qualities and fascinations, And that's part of the fun of drinking Grand Cru wines. Really, you just need to you need to buy a case every year so that you can keep comparing them. But I hope that at the end of this tasting, you will be convinced of this. So I'm now going to stop the screen and go back to me. I don't know how I do that. But anyway, I think I'm there. Can you hear me? Can you see me, Ronan? This is important.
Can see you, Christian, yeah.
That's all I need to know. Okay. I can see myself on a tiny little screen, but am I actually visible on the full screen?
Yeah, we can definitely see your face, and we can't see the PowerPoint anymore, so it's...
Very good, because I can only see a little postage stamp of me, but I know what I look like, so that's okay. So what I'd like us to do now is to taste the, I know that everyone has these little bottles. I've done one of these tastings as a member of 67 myself, and I got my bottles and did it. So we'll have a little taste, first of all, of the 2015, and I will then say a few words about the vintage and how it influenced the wine. And then after that, we'll taste 14, talk about the vintage, and then try and get a fuller understanding of the wines by comparing the two. So raise a glass and have a go at the 2015 Pichon Baron. So 2015 was a seriously good year. What we really need to make a great year here in the Medoc, where we have this Atlantic oceanic climate and quite frankly, sometimes quite bad weather, we need to have the conditions necessary to get the grapes ripe. I know this sounds very simple and basic, but it's important. And there are many ways in which this can happen. There are years where you have, there are absolutely wonderful years where from the beginning of June right through to the beginning of October, you have marvelous sunny weather. It really does happen. And those tend to be the very greatest years of all. Then you have other years where you actually have a wonderful hot sunny summer, but then perhaps, you know, not that great a September and October, but you can still make great wines that are summer ripened wines without a great end of season. And then you have the other kind where you have quite a cool summer and a marvelous end of season. And we get the grapes ripe at the end of the season. And that makes another style of wine as well. And we're going to be looking at, during this tasting, the three different styles of year. But anyway, this 2015 is in the first, well, I'm not sure which category was the first, but it's in the category of years that were wonderful, hot, sunny summers. So June, July, August were wonderful for us in 2015. We had quite enough rainfall at the beginning of the year, and we had marvelous, very hot, sunny summer throughout the entire ripening period from till the end of August. September was it was okay, but it was a little cooler. But it really didn't matter because by the beginning of September, the grapes were really actually ripe, and so we had a very early harvest in 2015. We just hauled the grapes in because they were ready. The 2015 is, I think, a perfect example of a wine that has been principally ripened in July and August. When you have that wonderful hot sunny summer in the middle of the summer, you have a very generous, ripe, full mid palate, which this wine I think has. It's also got, I mean, it's a great Pichon. It's immensely seductive. It has been ripe from the beginning. It has some pretty strong tannins, which are fine, just still a tiny bit grainy at the moment, need a little bit more time to soften up, really, although you can actually, provided you're eating the right thing, I promise you, you can pull the cork on this and start drinking it now, because it's an early developer, but that doesn't mean it won't be great for many decades to come. So 2015, perfect example of a midsummer ripened wine. Very much a Cabernet wine, this wine. This is 80% Cabernet, 20% Merlot. And that tends to be the blend that we've been doing at Pichon since about 2010, actually. We've really just been concentrating on the Cabernets with actually probably in the long run decreasing proportion of Merlot. But this is 80 and 20. And above all, its personality is determined by wonderfully ripe, beautiful Cabernets from that great plateau with deep beds of gravel, old vine Cabernet. Now, let's move on to the 2014. And this couldn't be more different. I'll give you a little time to taste because I think I shouldn't just be talking the entire time. Sometimes it's good to just taste and not hear anything. So I'll shut up. So 2014, in terms of weather profile, what nature gave us, because that's what we have to deal with every year, was almost exactly the diametric opposite of 2015. And for me, that's part of the fascination of tasting these wines and working that out. 2014, we had a very cool summer. This is a euphemism. In Bordeaux, we always use euphemisms. Nobody will ever tell you that it rained during harvest. They will say there was a bit of humidity. But sometimes there is rain, you know, but I still call it humidity. Sometimes if I'm walking in the vineyard and it's raining, I'll think to myself, what a lot of humidity there is today. And that's, you just get in the habit of euphemisms. So 2014 was a cool summer. That meant you didn't really want to go to the beach on Arcachon. And we began to get a little worried because it was such a cool summer. Of course, there was plenty of rain. It was, the grapes were wonderfully healthy, actually, but not quite as ripe as we would have liked by the end of August. And then in the last week of August, a wonderful period of really quite hot sunny weather set in and lasted throughout September and indeed up until the middle of October, which is really quite unusual. And so the 14 is, as I said, it's quite the opposite style to 15. And I think that shows in the wines. This did not get ripe in July and August. This got ripe in September and indeed in the first half of October. And the first half of October was important because in 2015, we'd actually finished the harvest by the 9th of October. And we actually only started picking the Cabernets at Pichon in 2014 on the 9th of October. So we started picking the Cabernets at the date that we'd finished the harvest in 15. So 14 was a very different style, a late ripening year with perfect conditions in 14 and in September and October. And what you get is a wine with wonderfully ripe Cabernets. There's not a hint of green on these. There's nothing unripe about this this wine, but because you didn't have the hot midsummer period, July and August, you don't have that wonderfully generous, exuberant ripeness you get in the 15, which has got so much charm. But you do have another charm, which I think is very important. You have a sort of coolness in the wine, and the coolness of the summer has given this freshness, coolness, and I think wonderful balance to the wine. There's actually there's something classic about this wine, in much overused word in Bordeaux, by the way, a bit like humidity. But for me, the 14 is very classic. It's wonderfully fresh, harmonious, and balanced, and the grapes did get perfectly ripe. You've got perfectly ripe Cabernets here, but they're end of season ripe. So you have something very, I think, fresh and elegant. I just think it's very interesting to compare with the 15. So have a little revisit of 15, a revisit of 14, and then we'll move on to the next two. By the way, I'm not spitting. I very often do spit when I'm tasting, but I don't think it looks very good on camera. And I'm rather enjoying these wines, so I'm not going to spit. So if by the end of the tasting I become a little incoherent and I can't answer any questions, I hope you will understand that it's all been in a good cause.
And Christian, I was wondering if you could give us your thoughts on why you often get two good vintages coming along together. Is that because you get that really good growth from a very good year and the second year kind of follows on from that with a similar kind of growth to it? Because you often get classics in pairs.
There definitely is the cycle of a vine is longer than 1 year, and it works the other way. If you've had something disastrous happening in 1 year, it may take you more than a year to recover. And am I on mute?
No, I can hear you. Yeah, we can hear you.
It's just saying mute, which rather worries me, but that's probably yeah. It definitely, if you've had a very good year, then the conditions are there for the next year to be also very good. It's more the other way around. If you've had something terrible happen, like a frost, it's not going to just recover immediately the following year. But we've been pretty lucky in recent years in Bordeaux. You know, the last very difficult year we had was 2013, where it was still possible to make good wines. And in fact, the 14 actually shows that I'm disproving my own theory, because although 14 was difficult, we didn't have a frost or anything like that. It was just that it rained a lot in the harvest, sorry, humidity, and that actually didn't stop the vines performing very well the next year. It is often the case that these things go in pairs, and we're about to taste a pair that actually exemplify what we're talking about. So I invite you to move to the next pair of wines, and we'll start by tasting the 2010. So if you'd like to just taste for a little bit, and then I'll say how we experienced the 2010, a few thoughts about the vintage, and then we'll compare with 9 and think a little more about these two very great years and how they compare with each other. So I spoke before about the kinds of years we might get, where we might sometimes get lovely sunny weather in the summer, or lovely sunny weather at the end of the season, and then sometimes we get lovely sunny weather throughout the important part of the year, from June to the end of September and into October. 2010 was a year like that. There was really not much to complain about. It was wonderful weather throughout the important part of the growing season, from beginning of June right through to mid-October. We had great conditions, but it was rather interesting because we had the sunshine, but it was actually quite cool. So it was not hot sunshine, and the nights were quite cool. And that's one of the things that determines the personality of the 2010. Another thing that's important about 2010 is that we had rather significantly lower rainfall than usual. And when you have a year here that, especially with Cabernets, where the rainfall is relatively low, you end up getting quite small bunches and quite small individual grapes. And the ratio changes between the tannins from the skins and the juice, because obviously in a small grape, you've got less juice, and there's more tannin from the skin and less juice. So 10 was always a very reserved and tannic wine, and was not actually incredibly forthcoming with its charms right from the beginning. But we knew that we had in our hands one of the great vintages in the history of Bordeaux, I think, and certainly in the history of Pichon Baron. This is definitely one of my favorite wines from Pichon Baron. But because of the coolness of the year, in spite of the summer, in spite of the sunshine, I mean, and because of the low rainfall, which meant that the tannins were more apparent in the wine, you have a wine which is was reserved from the beginning and still remains so, actually. And it's absolutely, I think it's absolutely lovely to taste now, but it's only just beginning to open up. It's a wine that I've only just started occasionally to serve, and knowing that it's too young, but finding it quite an enjoyable crime of infanticide to serve it up. I've only just started serving it at Pichon because it's really taking a long time to open up and show what it has to give us, but it will. Everything is in this wine. It has what I'm always sort of looking for in wine, which is the balance, the harmony, the freshness, the completeness. All the elements are in this wine for it to age for many decades and continue to develop and become a very great and beautiful Pichon, which it already is. But even when you drink it today, you think, and this is 10 years on, you think, well, maybe I should keep, if I've got any other bottles, let's keep them for a few more years before I try the next one. And that's probably a good idea, because the longer you keep this wine, the more it is going to unfold and develop and show us what it has. But I believe a great Pichon. And now we'll taste the 2009, and then I'll say a word about the 9 vintage and a few words comparing the 9 and the 10. So I hope that your samples are as good as the one I've got, because 2009 is and has been since the very beginning a magical vintage. It was again, like the 2010, a wonderful ripening season throughout the summer, throughout the end of season, September and October. Just wonderful sunny weather. But there are a few important differences between the 9 and the 10. And here at Pichon, the average temperatures in 2009 were actually 2 degrees higher than in 2010. That's a lot. And it makes a difference to the personality of the wine. Also, whereas the 2010 had slightly lower rainfall, and so you have a little bit more concentration, a little bit more tannic concentration in the 10, the 9, you had much more regular rainfall when we needed it, and there wasn't any stress, hydric stress in 2009 at all, whereas in 2010 there was a bit. And so when we picked the 2009s, you had the ratio between the skins and the juice was different. It has never been reserved in the same way as the 2010 because of its tannins, and also because it was, you have this 2 degrees warmer weather. Although perfect sunshine in both years, you always had this wonderfully seductive, exuberant ripeness about the 2009. But it's not an overripe wine, not at all. It's absolutely fresh, balanced, harmonious, but in the style of a wonderfully sunny, very warm year. And I think I find it absolutely fascinating to compare these two. It'd be interesting to know, if it's possible to know, what people think today. But if I ever open these two great wines here in the tasting room at Pichon, and I have a group of wine lovers, I often ask afterwards, who liked the 9, who liked the 10? It seems to be about 50-50, because and I think that's quite a reasonable conclusion to come to, because the 10, you have this wonderful freshness, balance, harmony, a really deep, profound complexity. The 10 is built for the long term. The 9 is built for the long term too, but the 9 is, you have this wonderful, ripe, seductive character, as well as the freshness and harmony and balance. So it's fascinating to compare them. It's a really good problem to have, trying to work out which one of these two you prefer. And it's perfectly okay to say, I like them both. It's certainly what I say. And I think it's very interesting to, not only interesting, but a huge pleasure to compare these two wines, because they're both among the supreme expressions of what the Pichon Baron terroir can give. They are both defined by noble Cabernet Sauvignon that's become perfectly ripe in wonderful conditions. But as I hope you can see when you compare them, the subtle differences in conditions, even in two nearly perfect years, as far as climatic conditions were concerned, really makes them very different personalities. And the only conclusion I can possibly come to is that the sensible thing to do is to have a few cases of each in your cellar and revisit these wines on a regular basis over the next, well, however many years you've got, and see what you think. You may have slightly detected that I have a sneaking preference for the 10. Probably because the 9 is so much easier to love than it was from the beginning than the 10. But it's a very, very tiny, percentage preference. The 9 is, of course, one of the very great wines Pichon has produced, and therefore one of the great wines of the world. So I hope you find this comparison interesting.
Well, I think, Christian, it's very interesting to have the 9 and the 10 and the 14 and the 15, because I think the 10 and the 15 are very similar, and the 9 and the 14 are very similar. I think both the 10 and the 15 have that real depth, that real core of very, very bright fruit. But then the 9 and the 14 kind of, for me, are a bit more classic Bordeaux, as it has that attack, and then it sort of dips down, and then it comes back in with really fresh acidity and a lovely kind of tannin. So yeah, it's a really interesting comparison of the 4 vintages together.
Well, we haven't finished yet, so let's see. But you know, I absolutely agree about the analysis of the 14 and the 9 being classic. You know, that they and that's the extraordinary thing about the 9, how hot and ripe. How hot the summer was, how ripe the grapes became, and yet how wonderfully fresh the 9 is, and how much depth there is. And the 14 has that as well, although it had slightly different ripening conditions. So, shall we move on to the next wine, which is the Pichon Baron 2005. This was a very important wine for us because we made this strategic decision in 2001 to focus on the grand terroir of Pichon Baron, the great plateau that I showed you before. And we, for 2001, 2, 3, 4, those were the first years where we were just concentrating on these very great terroir, making much less Pichon Baron. But 1, 2, 3, and 4, they're all lovely years, actually. I like them all. Not just because I have to, I really do like them all. But 2005 is a great year. And it was the first great year that came along since we had started this policy of making much less Pichon Baron, just concentrating on the very great terroir. And Pichon Baron 2005 really got noticed by quite a few people, and it marked an important turning in the history of Pichon Baron, because people started to notice what was going on. And obviously, if you reduce your production by a very dramatic percentage in order to make the wine as great as it possibly can be, there is the romantic dream of making the most beautiful wine you possibly can. But of course, it's rather nice if people notice. And they did notice in the period 2001 to 2004, but 2005 was the year that really marked a sort of step change in people's appreciation of Pichon Baron and what we were doing at Pichon Baron. So have a little taste of the 05 Pichon.
I appreciate the fact that you've made learning great Bordeaux vintages very easy for us, having a 5, a 10, 15. So we presume that 20 and 25 are going to be excellent vintages as well.
Yes, I think I can confidently predict that. In fact, you ought to place your orders right now. So 2005, it's a lovely year. It had one or two points of resemblance to 2010, but not that many actually. But one of the things that it had in common with 2010 was not so much rainfall. It was actually quite a closed tannic year from the very beginning, and actually it was even more backward. And in a way, it still is more backward than even the 2010, which was closed in by its very lovely tannins, which are the structure. Remember that these tannins are the framework and the structure that these very great wines from Pauillac need for the wines to be able to age and for the elegance and finesse of these great noble Cabernets to develop with age. But it does mean that sometimes, not always, as the 2009 shows, but sometimes they can be quite closed at the beginning, and sometimes that closed, reticent phase can last quite a long time. And this is certainly true about the 2005. And I am convinced, and I have been since we made this wine, that this is one of the great Pichons, the historic Pichons of the property. But in the early years, when I would show it, people would I would say, this is one of the great Pichons, and people would say, well, it's a bit closed, isn't it? And there's not much coming out at the moment. And it was true. The 05 has really begun to open in the last 3 or 4 years only. And when I say begun, I think it's only just beginning. It's beginning to show us what it's all about. But for me, it's an important wine because it was a return to greatness for Pichon in a great year. Interestingly, it's not such a high proportion of Cabernet as the later wines we tasted before. These days, Pichon Baron is around 80% Cabernet, although the 2019, which has just sold out en primeur, was 87% Cabernet, and we're sort of going in that direction. But the 2005 was actually only 65% Cabernet Sauvignon, and we had about 33% of Merlot. We even had a tiny bit of Cabernet Franc and Petit Verdot in those days, which these days neither Cabernet Franc nor Petit Verdot go into the Grand Vin anymore. But I have to say that in 2005 it seemed to work extremely well. But that's the 2005. So we now move on to the last wine in the series, and after that I'm open to talk about anything that anybody wishes to discuss about Pichon Baron, and it's the 2004. And I really like showing the 2004 after the 2005, because 2005 is a great vintage, we know that, and it is a wonderful wine. 2004 was one of those years that, and they often happen in Bordeaux, where when it's sold en primeur, people aren't that enthused about it, not excited enough. A few of the key journalists don't go overboard about it because it's not a blockbuster wine, and 2004 was definitely not a blockbuster wine. But actually, if you know Bordeaux well and you drink Bordeaux often, then you know that these cooler years can produce some of the most seductive, fresh, balanced, classic Bordeaux styles of all. And that means, since they don't get hyped up on primeur, or at any other time, actually, they can give you a chance to sort of navigate the waters of the Grand Cru market, and find, if you decide there's a year that you like, find some really lovely gems, which tend to be, it's a relevant fact, they tend to be a little cheaper than the blockbuster years, and sometimes they can be very beautiful. For me, 2004 is a bit like that. So I'm going to have a little taste, suggest you do too, and then I'll talk about the year. In terms of its makeup, it's very similar in grape varietals to the 2005. That's what we were doing then. In terms of climate, it was different. It was it had a profile a bit like 2014, actually, in that it was definitely what you would call a coolish summer, but a fantastic end of season, from the last week in August through September, through the beginning of October. This is if the 14 is an example of a slightly cooler summer and a lovely end of season ripening when it's young, 2004 is an example of such a year when it's really quite mature. And these days, I think that the 2004, while I'm quite sure the 2005 is the greater wine of the two, the 2004 is probably more seductive and more perfectly pleasurable to drink right now. And that's very often the case, that it's not just a question when you order a bottle of wine of always going for the big blockbuster. Sometimes the delicate, fresh, elegant year can give you more pleasure when it's ready to drink than the other one that might not quite be at its peak. And I think that's a case with this 2004. For me, this is a lovely example of course, it's not a light wine. It's from a very serious grand terroir in Pauillac. It has great profundity, complexity, and depth, but it's very fresh, very balanced. There's something wonderfully silky and fine about the tannins now, and I think that the 2004 is it's just one of those lovely classic Bordeaux wines, this lovely freshness, harmony, and balance, which is what it's all about. So you can you can have a bottle of this for lunch. You can even share it with somebody if you have to, and get up after lunch and feel just refreshed. It's a very refreshing wine, and for me, this is of course the great big blockbuster years are also part of what Bordeaux is about. But these lovely, delicate, elegant years are also a very important part of what Grand Cru Bordeaux is all about. So I like this wine very much, and that's why I wanted to show it to you. So there we are. We've come to the conclusion of this comparison of these 6 wines. I hope that the idea of comparing them in pairs like this made some sense. I hope that you were able to enjoy the wines and distinguish between the years, and that some small explanation about what actually happened in the vineyard could give you an idea about why the wines are different. But also, I hope that when you get to the end, you have a clear idea about what also makes them resemble each other a little bit. They all come from Pichon, and there is this line running through them, which is it's a fine line. It's the finesse of great Cabernet Sauvignon based wine and in very great terroir in southern Pauillac. And that's what Pichon's about. So I'm now open to answer any questions. I guess, Ronan, you're going to handle that, and I'm all ears.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was three different sets of wines that were very interesting. I thought 4 and 5 were the two most diverse from one another, and the 5's definitely, yeah, it's got a lot of potential. But the 4's fleshy and juicy and lovely for drinking now, but I can't see it lasting as long as the 5 for definite. So
no, I'm sure not.
Yeah.
But sometimes now is what matters. You know?
Yeah. So in the question box, we've got Tim who's asking, how did Pichon Baron manage to have a successful en-primeur campaign given the adverse conditions?
Well, it's an interesting, it's a very interesting question. And I have to say that a couple of months ago, when we were all in lockdown uncertainty and everybody was anxious, even if you're a very sanguine, optimistic person, which obviously I try to be, and I'm sure we all do. It was weird, wasn't it? And we didn't know where we were going, it was unimaginable that it was actually, you know, an en-primeur campaign might work. But collectively, the Bordelais chateaux and the négociants with whom they work decided that it was important to have an en-primeur campaign all the same. And so logistically, what we did was, first of all, as soon as France began to open up a little bit, all the Bordeaux négociants came one by one to taste the wines at Chateau Pichon. And so I was standing in this tasting room, meeting every single négociant one by one over a 2-week period, half an hour per négociant. I came in one door, came out the next, and then came the next one. We disinfected the room and all that. Not that you have to disinfect a room when a Bordeaux négociant's been in it. Those are just the rules, you know. So we actually managed to show the wine to everybody who these are people, our partners, the négociants, are the people whose role is to go out and tell all their customers and partners around the world what the wines are like. So we managed to get them to taste it. We also managed to send out samples. It's not an easy thing to send out en-primeur samples because the wines are, you know, before they're bottled, they're quite vulnerable. So we were very, very careful at Pichon Baron, sending out samples by the speediest way possible in temperature controlled packs and all that kind of thing. But we managed to get them to the key journalists, because the key journalists, they always have an important role to play, but they had a vital role to play this year because they were the people who had to tell people what the vintage was like and what the individual wines were like. So that was the logistical part of making it work. And then 2019 is an absolutely lovely year. It really is a great year. And there's something special about the very best 19s, I think. And I speak here as a consumer, not as a producer. Because I bought quite a lot of 19s myself for my cellar because I just think they're so lovely. And the very best ones, particularly on the left bank, which are the ones I like most in 2019, and especially from the very grand terroir. It seems to me that 19 was a year that enabled the very greatest terroir, especially the Cabernet terroir, really to reveal and express themselves. So the ones I bought tend to be, it's a bit of a major investment, but they tend to be from the grand terroirs because they've just been, they've just really performed. And there's something, there's just a wonderful purity and finesse about the very best 19s this year that I haven't quite come across before in exactly this style. The Pichon Baron is particularly like that. We decided that, you know, on the I spoke earlier about the Grand Plateau of Pichon being where we source the grapes for the Grand Vin these days. The old vine Cabernet on the Great Plateau of Pichon this year were as beautiful as I've ever seen them. And as a result, we didn't really want to put very much Merlot in them because there were some nice Merlots, but there was something so pure and fine about the Cabernets that very little Merlot was just enough. And so we actually, whereas normally in the last years, as I said before, we've been about 80% Cabernet, 20% Merlot. This year we went to 87% Cabernet, and we were really concentrating on those very noble Cabernets. And there was about 13% of Merlot, which just came. We got one parcel of Merlot on the Great Plateau next to the chateau, and that went in, and that was it. And it just made a wonderfully fine, great Pichon Baron. Luckily, a few of our journalist friends noticed this, and our negociant friends noticed this, talked about it. And then the final thing that really I think is very important about this campaign, it's one of the reasons that I bought a lot of 19s myself, is that Bordeaux collectively, I think, showed some sense. Even though we had in our hands one of the great historic vintages of Bordeaux, we dropped our prices, and we dropped them very considerably. And that's part of the reason. So a great vintage at lower prices because of the crisis. I tell you, I've sold all the Pichon now, so I can tell you what I think. I bought and I'm still buying some 19 Grand Cru wines because I think this is a very, very great vintage, and it may perhaps never be possible to buy some of these great wines from a great vintage at this price again. So that's why I think that it works. But anyway, Pichon Baron was a complete sellout, and not just sold out in Bordeaux, sold on through, and friends of mine in England were saying, where can I get some? So all that is, it's quite encouraging, and it means that for real Bordeaux lovers, even when times are a bit difficult and hard, if you've got an opportunity, something really great that comes along at a relatively accessible price, I do understand they're all expensive wines, even when we drop the price, then people will buy them, and they did.
Okay, and we also have Grant who's asking, you mentioned those gravelly mounds in those gravelly croupes in Bordeaux that are, world-class terroir for Cabernet Sauvignon. So why for Cabernet Sauvignon is gravel so good?
Well, it seems to work best there, and that's a question of experimentation, perhaps. But if I look at the Grand Plateau of Pichon Baron, what it means that the soil is actually very poor in these gravel mounds. You get great drainage because there's just a lot of stones. But if it was just a lot of stones, that wouldn't work. What you have if you do a sort of cross section of one of these gravel mounds, as you go down, you have from time to time horizontal layers with a little bit of clay and nutrients, and then more gravel. And so as the vine goes down, it will go down. It's going down looking for water and nutrients. It will find a horizontal layer of nutrients, and it will spread out laterally where it can, but it will keep on going down because it drains so much. The vine has to keep on going down to make sure it's got good supplies of water. And as it goes down, from time to time, it will find other horizontal layers where there are nutrients. So when you've got an old vine in one of these gravel beds, you have an enormous root structure going down very many meters, but not just going down, but going out as well. So you have an extraordinary concentration of minerality, nutrients, and everything that is good for the vine coming up through this huge root structure into the vine that's at the top. And what that means, and it seems to suit the Cabernet more than anything else, is that you get the vine basically is working very, very hard to nourish a rather small yield of bunches of Cabernet. And the Cabernets, because of that great root structure in these wonderful gravel parcels, they seem to react extremely well to this sort of condition, which intensifies everything that comes from the terroir and concentrates it in the grape. And Cabernet seems to express that better than Merlot. I can't give you a more scientific answer than that, but I can just tell you that wherever we've got those deep beds of gravel, centuries of experimentation have proved that Cabernet is the varietal that responds best to those conditions and produces the greatest wine.
Great. Well, we got a few questions about vintages now. So Vinod is asking, how would you compare the 6 to 4 and 5?
6, I really love the 6. 6 was a vintage that we here at Pichon loved from the beginning and considered one of the best wines we've made. But it was also, it had it had an acidity that was slightly higher than any other wine we've ever made. And we're not quite sure why, actually, because it was quite a ripe year, but that's how it was. Sometimes these things, they pass human understanding. And the 6 had this acidity. Also was quite tannic. And so it was another of those years that we were convinced and we knew was great. And lots of wine lovers, journalists, consumers, and negociants have tasted the 6 and agreed that it's a very, very lovely year. But it also took a long time to come around, and it was well tasted on primeur, but I think partly because of this slightly definite, it was less seductive when it was a baby even than the 5. And so the 6, I think, has never quite had the reputation it deserves. But if you open a bottle of 6 now, if you can find one, they're very lovely wines, just beginning to come in their own, and it's built for long aging. I think 6 is a great year, but it's one that the longer you can give it, the better it is, really.
Okay, and Bradley is asking, he's enjoying a bottle of 2003. And where would you say that rates amongst the others?
Well, 3 it's a really interesting year because 3 was it was very hot and sunny and very dry, extremely dry, and it was actually worrying conditions in terms of drought. And it was a year because of that, I think. And I at the time, we also had a property in Pomerol, Château Petit Village, which we recently sold. But the Petit Village 2003, which has all been sold, so I can say what I want to say, it was not my favorite year at Petit Village because in 2003, at Petit Village, which has it has clay and gravel soil, but it doesn't have vines that go down so deep as they do here at Pichon. You could actually see, and it's also very much a Merlot property, you could actually see the Merlots, you could see the grapes shriveling up and the leaves of the vines wilting on that plateau of Pomerol in 2003. Whereas when you came back up to Pichon, it was only the Grand Terroir that really performed here. So the very greatest terroir, the big plateau we've been talking about, with the old vine cabs, with their very deep root structure, you could see everything wilting around. There were trees with wilting leaves because it hadn't been raining, but the vines had quite dark green leaves, and the grapes were not shriveling up at all at Pichon on the Grand Terroir. On some of the secondary terroirs, yes, it probably wasn't the best year for our second wines, but it was an absolutely astonishing year for the Grand Vin. And I think that it's 2003 Pichon Baron it's astonished me. I wasn't expecting it to be so fresh in the bottle. When we first made it, I thought, whoops, what have we done? We've made a Napa Cabernet by mistake. And I love Napa Cabernet, by the way. We just bought a property in Napa. It's, the point is not to make one here in Pauillac, of course. But it was extremely ripe at the beginning. And I wondered whether it had enough freshness to be a great Pichon with time. And what has happened to the 2003 is it's aged in the bottle, is that the terroir of Pichon has asserted itself over the year. And you've had a really astonishing freshness and balance assert itself in the wine as it's aged. And the 2003 is a wine today that I did not imagine that it could be just after we made it. And that's true also of many of the great terroir on the left bank. In Saint-Estèphe, there's some absolutely astonishing 2003s as well. But I think that for 2003, you really want to be looking for very grand terroir, very Cabernet-based wines, left bank, and probably towards the north of the Medoc for the very best ones. And Pichon's one of those. So if you've got some of that, then that's good. And there's no hurry to drink it. It's coming along very, very well.
Okay, and another vintage question. So Miriam is asking, could you say a few words about the 2008 and the 2016?
Yeah, sure. 2008 is slightly in the series of it's the midpoint in between 2004 and 2014. We had 4 and 14 today, both of which were cool summer years that were sorted out by a wonderful end of season in September and October. And 2008 was just the same. And it's not the least of those three. It's a really lovely year. We had an absolutely magnificent September and October in 2008, following a cool summer. And I think that given the differences of age and evolution, you could definitely align 2008 in that series of 14 and 4. If you like that style of wine, I certainly do, but you have to decide whether you do, then 8 is a lovely wine, and it's actually drinking very well already. But it's quite clear to me that it'll age a long time, because it's got structure, harmony, freshness, balance, everything you need to age for a long time. But it's incredibly enjoyable already. The 2016 is I think one of the great years that we've ever had. We spoke before about years when you either have you get the grapes ripe in summer, or you get them ripe at the end of the year. 16 was one of those years, like 9 and 10, when you just have a prolonged ripening season where the conditions were good, the rainfall, this is specific to 16, rainfall was just enough, everything was right. We really had a lovely agricultural year, or viticultural year, and the conditions were very perfect and balanced, and the wine shows that. When you have this very long ripening period, you get an extra dimension in the wines, I think, which is one of perfect harmony and balance, and the 16 has that, and it also has a great freshness and purity to it. And for me, 16 is very beautiful wine, very great year, one to wait for as long as you can possibly bear it, because it's just going to go on getting better and better. But even if you do crack and open a bottle in the meantime, I've done that once or twice. It's quite lovely. So great year.
Okay, and so Michael from Chicago is saying, what's the average vine age for the Grand Vin parcel?
Quite old, actually. There are quite a few vines in that parcel that are hovering around 60 years. But very occasionally, when they get a bit older than that, we have to dig them up, because once they start hardly producing any grapes at all, you have to think about the long-term renewal of the vineyard. But it's always an incredibly painful decision, because as they get older, of course, the yields get lower and lower and lower. and they are low on that grand parcel, but the quality of wine you get from those grapes, it gets better and better. But obviously there's a diminishing return at the very end when you're hardly getting any grapes at all. And you also have to think about the long-term future. You can't just allow the vines to become very, very old everywhere on the grand parcel. So we do a little bit of replanting from time to time, and always painful. So we've got some 60-year-old vines. We've got vines that are in their 50s, in their 40s. But on that, on the parcel that makes the Grand Vin of Pichon, I should think we're around, on average, about 45 years old.
Great. And I think really the last question would be from Burhan, who says, is it possible to visit the chateau for a tasting?
Of course it's possible to visit the chateau, and all you need to do is go on the website, and it's very, very clear about what you need to do to make an appointment to come and see us. And there's nothing we like better than people coming to see us, visiting the chateau and tasting the wines here. And I hope that any of you who are listening, who get the chance to come to Pauillac, will bear in mind that we want to see you, and we are a very welcoming chateau, and it will be a pleasure to share our wines with you and taste them with you. So please come and see us.
Yeah, and I would say that anyone going up to Pauillac, it's an absolute must to go and visit Pichon Baron, because it is an amazing chateau with a great tasting room. So it's definitely something to put on the to-do list if you are traveling to Bordeaux. Christian, thank you very much. It's always a great pleasure to talk to you. You know, I've been a big fan of Pichon for many, many years. I think that you have done and are continuing to do an amazing job with what you're doing, refining and refining and refining and making the wines better every year. So thank you so much for spending an hour of your time with us.
Well, thank you.
From Griffins all around the world, I'd say thank you very much for your concern about their welfare.
Very good. Okay, well, I hope to see you soon in the club when we're all we have our freedoms restored. And thank you everybody who came along to this tasting. Please come and see us in Pauillac when you can. It will always be a pleasure.
All right. Thank you very much, Christian. Good night.
Goodbye. Bye, Ron.